Live from Johannesburg, this is Tonight with Jane Dutton. Stoners rejoice. It's now okay to get high at home. Marijuana has been decriminalized in South Africa. Is it a sign of progress or the last thing this country needs? Join our panel discussion on the pros and cons. And a family's pain trying to get their son's body identified and home 8 months after a train fire. Missing remains on checkpoint. Tonight with Jane Dutton. Peter Tosh asked for it and, well, now it's happening. It's okay to use marijuana in your home. Is this move smart, progressive, or just downright stupid? That's my question for my panel tonight. What's yours? You can call in on 011-759-6340. You can also tweet us on hashtag Tonight with Jane Dutton. But first, here's Ronald with the other updates from today. Ronald.
Thank you, Jane. These are some of the other top stories today. Another bank has testified on how the ANC tried to exert pressure on it on behalf of the Guptas. ABSA is the second bank to testify at the state capture inquiry. It's one of several banks that closed all Gupta-linked accounts in 2016. ABSA says the ANC met to discuss legislation and the framework around the closure of accounts. Party members at the meeting included Gwede Mantashe, Jesse Duarte, and Enoch Godogwana.
The meeting was opened by the Secretary General of the ANC, Mr. Mantashe, who indicated that the meeting was not to discuss client and customer information, predominantly because our CEO started the meeting by making it explicitly clear that should the meeting involve discussing client confidential information, we would not be able to partake in it. In fact, to use her words directly, she said it would be a very short meeting if we're discussing client confidential information.
A mother and her 3 children have died in a Philippi shack fire in Cape Town. The children were aged 4, 8 and 10 years old. Their father and 14-year-old brother were not home when the fire broke out. It gutted 4 shacks last night, leaving 20 people homeless. It's not clear how the blaze started.
Yeah, it was so difficult to see, to break down the fire, as it was the double story and the fire started on the lower level. It was so difficult because there was a burglar bar, and the burglar bar, it was so difficult to open it. And then we get a child, a firstborn of our neighbor. He told us that his mother and his siblings are on the upper level. So we tried to break down the fire, but we couldn't get it through there because the fire was so hectic. And then that's how we lost those siblings.
In another incident of violence involving school children, a video of a pupil in Mpumalanga assaulting a bus driver has gone viral. The video shows a 19-year-old pupil shouting at a bus driver and assaulting him while the bus is in motion. The driver was driving the learners home. The Mpumalanga Department of Education is condemning the incident. It's believed the incident happened last week and a case of assault has been opened. The pupil has since appeared in court and the school has instituted a disciplinary hearing. Well, that's it from me. Jay?
Thanks very much for that, Ronald. What was the Constitutional Court thinking when it decriminalised marijuana today? Can South Africa, with its massive unemployment problem, afford to have more people on drugs? Now, not only is it okay to grow it at home, but you can smoke it too. University of Johannesburg's Julie Grant, Rehabilitation Expert Natrishka Naidoo, and lawyer and cannabis lawyer Garreth Prince join me in the studio. And in Durban, we have the Concerned Young People of South Africa's Adam Mickleburgh. Welcome, all 4 of you. Garreth, what were you thinking when you pushed this case forward? Is it the right, responsible thing to do?
South Africa has been a constitutional democracy for the past 23, 24 years. And it's the very opposite of a police state. Now, what that means is that we don't simply throw the criminal justice system at every problem that we have within society. And the problem of substance use and abuse is unfortunately one that's never been debated in this country in a rational, logical fashion. And unfortunately, the debate around cannabis is one that has been informed most of the time by conjecture and half-truth as opposed to rational, conscious thinking. So what we were thinking is that the indigenous people of South Africa, as the Rastafari, myself, and Khoi people, have the right to determine our own life projects, which might not necessarily involve alcohol or tobacco. But we want to make use of a plant that's been indigenous to our country for hundreds of years, and it only became criminal once the colonialists came here. So to revive our own culture and to respect the fundamental human rights of adult South Africans, that's one of the reasons why we pushed this case initially.
Julie, your response.
Well, I've been working with the Komani Bushmen in the Northern Cape for more than 10 years. And I think, you know, it's not a straightforward yes or no answer. There's certainly benefits to it in the sense of people in the community I work in aren't going to be criminalised for carrying small amount of dacha, which then excludes them from certain jobs such as tour guiding or game ranging. But on the other hand, you know, that there is I would say there's quite a substance abuse problem in the community I work with, both alcohol and cannabis. In fact, cannabis is seen as the more positive option compared to alcohol because there tends to be less violent crime with them.
But I should imagine the combination's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, but I mean, really alcohol is the main problem. But I think, you know, we have to really be looking at for a lot of communities, why are they choosing this way out? It's a symptom, you know, it's a symptom of a deeper problem for a lot of people, not for everyone because some people choose, but for a lot of people they're living quite unhappy lives. And it's the solution is to either drink or smoke dacha.
Natrishka, what is your response to today's ruling?
I agree with Julie on this, that on one hand, whilst decriminalization may be a good thing in terms of the fact that is it really a criminal act to be smoking marijuana, we also do have to look at the fact that we live in a country where there's an enormous rate of addiction. And unfortunately, whereas most of the population is not negatively affected by marijuana, from an addiction perspective and from a treatment perspective, the 1 out of 10 that are affected, unfortunately, end up with a psychiatric or psychological problems. That can be long-lasting.
That's quite a high percentage, isn't it?
It is quite a high percentage. And the danger comes in is if it continues, there's psychological and long-term or permanent psychiatric effects. And that's, I think, where the danger comes in here.
Adam, you've had quite a close relationship with cannabis. How did you feel when you heard this news?
Yes. Well, as an organization, looking at the drug epidemic that we currently face in the country amongst the young people, we ask if this isn't the final nail in the coffin of the future of the youth of the country. And we question how such a decision could have been made given the circumstances. While we do hear what Mr. Prince says about how rights should be respected in a constitutional democracy, we also need to consider that rights need to be balanced against each other. So we have a question, for example, should an adult be able to use cannabis in the privacy of their own home? What about the rights of the child living in that home? What about the rights to safety and security? What about the impact that it will have on the rest of society? It's unreasonable to believe that a person will smoke cannabis at home and remain indoors after having done so. So we are looking at an increase of road accident fatalities due to people leaving home and driving under the influence. It's fortunate that we don't have to guess as to where this is going to head. We do have some examples. We've had a very nice study that was released by Johns Hopkins University, which shows us a very clear picture of the circumstances a couple of years now after legalization in Colorado. We see that youth use of cannabis has increased, crime has increased, submissions or entries into poison emergency centers have increased, especially amongst children who have been exposed to cannabis and cannabis edibles inside the home. And we find that there's an increasing problem with employment. They don't face the challenges we face here with unemployment, but as much as they have job opportunities available, they cannot find anybody to hire, especially for jobs that involve operating machinery or other dangerous work, if we could call it that, because the young people all are testing positive for drugs. So these are just a few of the indications of where we're headed with this. And we
Okay,
would
just
say
hold
that we
on
are
a
becoming
second there.
increasingly alarmed.
Sorry, Adam, just hold it a second. Let's just pack through or, unpack some of the claims that you've made. And I'm just wondering what you make of the dangers posed by Adam and his group there. I mean, they are pretty real dangers.
With the greatest of respect, all of your panelists are missing the crucial point. And that is that the police had the right to arrest people for their usage of a particular substance. The reality is that tobacco and alcohol, as the judgment stated, as did the report by the criminologist, these substances kill hundreds of thousands of people a year. A cannabis psychosis is something that can be reversed. Death cannot be reversed. And the crucial point that the Constitutional Court did today was to say that substances cannot be regulated via the criminal penal code. The reality is that there's double standards when it comes to alcohol and tobacco as opposed to cannabis. When people inform themselves with a fact and not with a conjecture or the half-truth, then they will come to see that there is much less harm, as was recognized by the court, in using cannabis as opposed to tobacco and alcohol. We're talking about people dying by the hundreds of thousands, whereas we're not considering locking them up for using or possessing it, which is what the government has done with the indigenous people. And the fact is that First Nation people predominantly are the ones that suffered this injustice. We are the ones that landed up in jail. So that's what we're talking about. Nobody's denying that substance abuse is a legitimate problem within our society. We are saying that the methods that we use in order to redress the problem needs to be scientific and it needs to be informed.
Okay, you say it needs to be scientific and informed. How much research went into this debate, this problem, before the Constitutional Court ruling? I mean, is it something that was allowed to be done because it has been illegal until now? Have we got enough evidence of what's right and
wrong? It might not have
wrong?
been done in this country, but the evidence is there. And it's the duty of legislators.
But you earlier said not enough research had been done. So I'm wondering if this ruling is not therefore premature.
Not at all, not at all. Because it has happened in several other countries in the world. South Africa is only the first in Africa to do it. But there are several other countries in the world, and it is most definitely the trend to work towards decriminalization and realizing you don't solve the problem of substance abuse by throwing the criminal justice system at it.
Okay. How can it help people, though, knowing that they can have access at any time when they want to?
I think really the important thing is it's, again, it's about everything in moderation, if you like. And this is where the comparison with alcohol, again, we're not making alcohol illegal, as you say, and there's lots of problems
but
with
it
alcohol.
probably should.
Yeah,
It is a bigger killer.
So for me, it's really about degrees. A lot of people will use cannabis responsibly, and a lot of people use alcohol responsibly, and a lot of people won't. And to an extent, it's what you say. It's about we actually need to be thinking as a country, what are we going to do to address issues of substance abuse? And instead of just criminalise everybody that uses a particular substance.
And when you criminalise it, does it push it underground then?
Most definitely.
Yes.
But, okay, you mentioned the word moderation. I mean, that's the ideal, isn't it? I mean, how people really are moderate. And if you are desperate, if you don't have work, if you're going through a bad stage, moderation might not necessarily come into your abuse.
No, of course. The challenge, as I said, within South Africa is that because we do have a large amount of poor people, the poor of any country are predisposed towards addiction, primarily because of your social ailments, your stresses, your unemployment, and things like that. And that does tend to push people towards addiction. As I said, if you are part of the large amount of people that are not negatively affected, fantastic. But what happens when you are predisposed towards addiction? Then that means that with the increased accessibility...
And some people are, aren't they?
Yes. And with the increased accessibility and affordability now, because if you can grow it in your backyard, it's basically free.
And you can have as much as you want.
Precisely. So that also brings into the question of moderation. Because it's not like alcohol where you buy a bottle and that is your limited amount. It's unlimited.
But why are there these double standards? The reality is that millions of people in this country are addicted to cigarettes. It kills them. But the fact is, we don't think about locking them up for having a pack of cigarettes in their pocket. That is what we need to realize. And education is how we solve all of these problems. That's obviously not going to happen overnight. But what people tend to miss is that when it comes to cannabis, it's not just a recreational thing, it's industry. And that is something that government has neglected to investigate, because we can make paper, we can make clothes, we can make fuel, we can make bricks for houses. So here we have a substance that we can use. The millions of unemployed people in this country would be able to put to work with cannabis, and we can create the green economy, and in 5 years reverse the poverty, the debilitating poverty that the majority of these people in this country are suffering. And the fact that the penal system has been used to increase the poverty, and the fact that people haven't had, and the have-nots, the fact that there has been a penal system that criminalized them, that made it difficult for them to get jobs, to get visas, to be accepted by society. Justice Sachs, if I can just say, 16 years ago, he said that if our constitutional exercise were to be successful, it's going to depend on how we accept one another for who and what we are. The fact that people don't like Rastafarians, that's okay. You don't need to like me. You need to tolerate me. You need to learn to live with me instead of judging me and just wanting to see me in prison, because that's not going to make me go away. I'm here to stay.
Okay, so it's working within your communities, obviously working with people you are surrounded by. But Adam, if I can bring you in now, I mean, talk us through how hard it is when you're an addict and what an addiction to marijuana means and the sort of impact that it can have on your life.
Well, if I could just very briefly start by saying that I think I should first highlight the fact that we cannot refer to overseas situations when speaking about South Africa. We're a third world country with our own set of unique problems. And as was pointed out by Mr. Prince himself, we lack any studies in the South African context. So what we're doing here is basically the beginning of a big experiment. And we're also quite concerned about the current disconnect that exists between policymakers and grassroots communities. As was mentioned, the situation amongst the poor of South Africa, which is by far the majority, is being overlooked, and their voices not being heard in this situation. And we would just like to take this opportunity to remind government, to remind those at the court, that we have been around the country warning people as to the dangers of this drug, warning them about the harm that it causes. And we would just like to ask them to remember that if at some stage in the future it enters into their own home, perhaps not with their children or their children's children. And we would also, if I can speak from personal experience, yes, I do have experience with the harms that the drug causes, psychologically and physically as well. Also the fact that there is no doubt that this drug leads to other drugs, especially in a South African context where we see a rapid movement amongst young people from the smoking of cannabis into the use of heroin and cannabis as a cocktail, because that is quite a unique South African method of ingestion. I also speak from experience there. So I think what we need to understand is that we cannot allow popular opinion or pie in the sky, castles in the sky to inform us when we should be looking at evidence. The evidence is there, it is before our eyes, but we fear that those who are most directly affected by the harms of this drug have not been consulted. And basically we now find ourselves on the verge of a public health crisis, which will be brought about by cannabis.
You looked shocked.
That gentleman is not informed by science or fact.
Well,
the fact
he's talking from his own personal experience.
That we don't know as to whether it is cannabis that led to whatever misfortune or whatever health problem he had. That is something that has to be tested objectively. We can't just believe him because he says so. He's not a psychiatrist. But the fact that he can sit there and call me a drug user or call my culture a drug culture It just shows the arrogance that is a part of the problem within South Africa. People need to respect that people of this country, they've used cannabis for thousands of years before Europeans came here. And the fact that the apartheid government, created this law, not our people. It was a law that was created by the apartheid government and took over by the so-called liberation government. And for the past 23 years, they've held not only the Rastafari community, but the indigenous community of South Africa captive. And look where that has landed our country. And now people want to place that in front of drugs. That is, it's just but purely hypocritical.
I see your political angle here and what it is that you have achieved from a message point of view. But the reality is that it does affect people adversely. You can't smoke a big fat joint. Maybe you could and then get in your car and drive safely off to work or,
I think we shouldn't necessarily get off track here, because on one side it is saying that, yes, decriminalization is not a bad thing, because no, someone should not be thrown in jail for their beliefs or their cultures. But simultaneously, we have to take into account the society that we live in. And South Africans have had an enormous prevalence towards addiction. We have an enormous heroin problem here in South Africa at the moment. So,
is this a gateway?
70% of our patients have said that marijuana was their gateway drug. So this is statistics from our own treatment center.
No scientific basis for that statement. And that
These are
is
numbers
something
that were actually taken down from the people we have treated.
we're talking about international studies, and this evidence was served before the
We're
court.
talking about our own studies.
Yes, studies that have done
people
within
on
our
a
treatment centers. So
daily
this
basis.
is what I'm saying. On a daily basis, we are treating people in this way. That's why I am saying that whilst I agree with decriminalization, we also have to look at the negative impact it can have and try and take account of how we can maybe lower the harm or have harm reduction for that.
Okay, how do you get the balance there then?
Yeah, I know. I do agree decriminalisation is a good idea. And, I can't speak for statistics and international research, but what I can say in the community I work with is I have people coming up to me saying, my life's a mess, I would like to stop drinking, I would like to stop smoking dacha, but I don't know how to, and there's actually no help available to them. I work in the Northern Cape. There's not a rehab facility in the Northern Cape available. Yeah. So, if the government are going to go
is there
down
no
this
facility available? I mean, obviously funding, but is it because the problem is not perceived to be as big as it is?
It is perceived to be a problem. Just that there's not a lot of help. There was one rehab facility and it was closed down about 2 or 3 years ago. Now, if they send someone for rehabilitation, they get sent to the Western Cape, and then on return to the community, there's no support group. There's one social worker covers a huge area, and she herself will say, everybody is her client. There's no support group, there's no Alcoholics Anonymous, there's lack of internet, we don't have TV, people don't have television. So while there's support groups online for people with that access, the community I work in don't have that access. And as I say, I don't have the statistics, but I have people coming up to me saying, can you help me? Yeah. And I'm limited, I'm really limited what I can do. So I think if the government is going to go down this route, which I think is good, I think it's also advisable then that maybe they think about investing and helping people in these poor and often rural communities with some sort of services for the ones that want it, and the ones that don't want it and don't need it, that's great.
I just want to say, sorry, very quickly, that we're having problems with our phone line, so if you've been trying to get through and you can't, our apologies. Sorry, what did you want to say?
Yeah, no, I just lost my point now.
Oh, sorry. Okay, maybe we should bring in Adam again. Adam, how do we get the middle ground here? Because there seems to be, general agreement here that decriminalizing is not it's not bad in the sense that you're not throwing petty criminals at that stage into jail. But how do we balance this so that you appease all sides?
I think the point to remember is, as was pointed out, you can't argue with first-hand experience, not only mine, but that of the families and young people across the country. And it's clear that we currently have a drug epidemic on our hands that we are failing to deal with. And we cannot understand how a decision to throw petrol on the fire could have been made. Now, we actually arrived at a higher figure than 70% of young people who our organization has helped, who told us themselves that it was dacha that they started with, they progressed into the use of harder drugs. Young people don't wake up smoking heroin or crack cocaine. They start with dacha and it leads them into other drugs. And we feel that those who are most directly affected organizations like ours who are daily putting our backs to the work of trying to help the young people in the country were not properly consulted in this decision-making process. This should have been a parliamentary process, not a process that took place in the court. In fact, they did attempt to push it through Parliament. Parliament was not in favor of the recreational legalization of the smoking of dagga. It looks like this was another avenue that was pursued without proper preparation, without proper research, and without a realistic view of what the situation is in the grassroots communities in South Africa at the moment.
Can I just jump in here?
So
if this has
we
opened
cannot
a sort
say
of
that-
dialogue,
sorry.
Adam, sorry. If this has opened up a dialogue of addiction, I mean, shouldn't things like alcohol now be tackled? Because that is a big problem. So, I mean, would this possibly open up a bigger debate about what's a better way to treat our communities if we have to be Big Brother?
I think in this day and age, if alcohol was introduced in modern times, it would probably also be illegal, considering the negative impacts it has had. But once again, now that we're here and the Constitution has decided that we're going to go ahead with this, it's no longer a case of is it right or is it wrong? It's how do we actually manage with it going forward? And
how do we?
I think that's the biggest question here tonight, maybe, that how do we actually put things in place to keep our youth safe, to keep it from escalating from a recreational use into something more serious, like heroin use, which is enormous at the moment.
I mean, should there be more rules? You've scored your victory there, but do you think there should be rules? For example, like the tobacco laws where you can't smoke in your car. Obviously, you're only supposed to have it at home. Smoke in your car with your kids, smoke at home in front of your children. Should there be some sort of legal framework?
We want regulation, obviously. I mean, that's a given. But that regulation has to take place outside of the framework of the criminal justice system. We are saying that substance abuse is a social health problem.
And I'm going to have to stop you there because we've run out of time. My apologies. Julie Grant, Adam Mickleburgh, Garreth Prince and Natrishka Naidoo. Thank you very much.